We invite Dr. Shrevata Mishra, music psychologist and therapist, Indian classical vocalist, All India Radio Artist Research Supervisor, associated with Banasthali Vidyapith, Rajasthan, India, and Professor Ina Shastri, Dean Faculty of Fine Arts and Head Department of Performance Arts, Banasthali Vidyapith, Rajasthan, India, to kindly present their paper. Please.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Shweta Mishra, music psychologist and therapist, research supervisor associated with Vanasthali Vidyapith, Rajasthan. Along with me, this paper has been co-authored by Professor Ina Shastri, Dean Faculty of Fine Arts and Head of Department of Performing Arts, Vanasthali Vidyapith, Rajasthan. I'm here with my paper titled Impact of Lockdown on Women's Psychology and Relief Through Raga Therapy, Therapeutic Effect of Rag Yaman During COVID Pandemic. We can help to stop the spread of coronavirus if we can reduce the human state of panic and stress during the infectious disease, specifically in women. Fear is basically due to the following reasons: fear and worry about your own health and health of your loved ones, fear of contamination, low mood, difficulty in concentrating, anxiety of overwhelming fear, negative thinking, virus related worries and insecurities, self verbalization that does not always reflect reality, feeling of discouragement, then insecurity, sadness, and anger, fearing of being enclosed, loss of pleasure, and overthinking. When I'm saying specifically women, why am I being so specific about them? Because women in this COVID pandemic, where they had faced lockdown and everything, women is someone who has worked 24 hours regularly, managing their house, managing their office, their children, without any help, without any domestic help. Most of the women are working that way, specifically the housewives as well. So their thought process, because they have been confined to the home, they are not being able to go out, they are not being able to socialize with the people, with their friends. So obviously women is someone who are soft hearted and who are overthinkers, obviously, because they have been confined, and due to this pandemic, due to coronavirus situation that arises, and they have been so much into packed environment, they have been prone to overthinking, stressing themselves, and creating anxiety. So how women can, these few points of fear, how they can remove these fears, how they can enhance their psychology with the help of music, is what am I going to help them to do accordingly. So why am I saying music therapy is very helpful for them, or for anyone who has facing or going through this rough phase during this coronavirus pandemic? Is why, because music is a divine power, and we all humans are blessed with. It's not really important that you have to sing, or you have to be really in a tonal chord to sing or to understand music. Music is something which has no side effect. It's one therapy that has no side effect. You can have multiple of doses throughout the day, and it can improve you, and it can instill in you the positivity. Music therapy can help with the stress relief, pain management, relaxation, meditation, socialization, expression of emotion, communication, then anxiety and reduction, improving quality of life, and also patient and client satisfaction. Now, how you can use music, how can you use this music to strengthen your thought process, your psychology, which is really easy, and just we need to follow up these few points. First is, when mentally exhausted, women do not listen to slow pace or sad music. To keep yourself motivated, listen to upbeat and fast beat songs. Your wake up alarm should not be harsh or loud. It must be soft, instrumental like sitar, veena, guitar, piano, or sound of rain or waterfall. Afternoon music during self-isolation should be of medium tempo with positive words. Make sure whichever song you listen must have positive words or messages, as repetitive negative words unconsciously goes to your subconscious mind and acts accordingly. If you're listening too much of sad songs, too much of, these dull songs, obviously they're going to hamper your mood. So always listen to some positive, some peppy songs, some fast beated songs. You might love to hear sad song, that's perfectly fine. As choice of music entirely depends on individual's music inclination, but During this phase of COVID-19 and lockdown, try to limit to certain songs, specifically in the afternoon when your brain and body is tired, and during night when your brain and body needs rest. Because in the night, when you're sleeping, you are in a charging mode, like we charge a cell phone, so your body is also in a charging mode. You need to feed your body with lots of positive and lovely songs and positive vibrations to charge you for the other day. Important to meditate at least 20 minutes a day in the morning, evening, or night, whichever is your comfortable, time zone. Then it's not important that you have to sit in a proper posture and have to, concentrate on one point in the body. No, you can sit and enjoy the sunset. You can enjoy the breeze, the weather, but you have to give 20 minutes of the day to yourself, and you have to just be in a peaceful situation or in a peaceful condition where you would be just with yourself and enjoying that moment. Music should always be played in the background while you're working, but remember that music has to be some fast beat, upbeated songs with positive messages. Listening to music have a great effect for coping. The soothing power of music is well established. It has unique link to our emotions, so can be extremely effective stress management too. Try to be more creative during this time of quarantine, lockdown. Singing or shouting can also be great release of tension, and karaoke is very enjoyable for some extroverts. Calming music before bedtime promotes peace and relaxation and induces sound sleep. Now, reason of why to listen Rag Yaman. So Rag Yaman helps to support the best physical and mental state of sleep. It can slow the pace of mind, aid focus, bring comfort. Rag Yaman stimulates secondary experience that facilitates sleep. Rag Yaman block or prevent the focus of disturbing thoughts or sounds. Thoughts include mental reviews of the past day or unwanted future plan. This rag can also be used to fulfill unbearable silence. So various points in this slide, I have mentioned that it induces an sound sleep. Why am I being very specific on the word sound? Is because if you're not going to have a sound sleep, if you're not being able to sleep at the night, obviously for the other day, you'll not be charged enough. You will feel irritated, depressed, anxiety will be there, stress will be there. You'll be more in a frustrating kind of a stage, and you might fear or you experience that and you might not understand. So for that you need to sleep well, and Rag Yaman is something that's going to help you to the extent. Well, during this COVID, we did some experimental work as well, obviously online, because we had to maintain all those social distancing and we have to follow all the rules. So we did this online thing with the two groups, 20 to 40 years and 50 to 80 years, and both the genders were included. We gave them questionnaire to find out what kind of rags they like, what kind of songs they like, which reflected that most of them loved Rag Yaman. Then in the initial phase of our experiment, we tried to find out the anxiety and stress level, which we found that stress was at its peak in the initial phase of our experiment that we were doing. Okay, then we started giving our, these subjects Rag Yaman based songs. Obviously, they were all not classical songs, but they were Rag Yaman based movie songs, film songs, ghazals, spiritual bhajans, and all this kind of songs were there. So we found that at the initial, as you can see in the graph in itself, that when we started, in the first week when we started, the anxiety level, the stress level was the highest. But by the end of the fourth week, we found it was the least. Why? Just because impact of the Rag Yaman song that we gave to them was it resulted in a miraculous way that it was the least by the fourth week, because we followed all the steps that I've mentioned in my previous slides. Also, we followed all these steps, and also we gave them the music as per their inclination, but the structure of the song was based on Rag Yaman. So the result is that the gradual downfall in the levels of the mental exhaustion, stress, and anxiety was noticed during the empirical approach with Rag Yaman based song. That proves that whatever be the genre of the song, but if the fundamental structure of the song is based on Rag Yaman or Kalyan Dhak, then it will be proved beneficial for the women during this stress time and can develop the positive effect and process. Due to anxiety, the subjects who were facing insomnia also told that Rag Yaman was helpful to induce peaceful sleep. So Rag Yaman is not something which is gender-based, that only women will, the effect will be on women. It can be on children or on the older people, on the male and female, everyone. At the end, I would just like to conclude with a positive note that we waste our whole life preparing for the future, not realizing that the only way to be happy is to embrace each moment. This situation or this present condition is whatever we are is going to change. Yes, it's going to change to have you really connect with your thought and your feelings at the moment. You need to be positively inclined and full of positive aura. Just breathe in and relax. Be positively and musically motivated. Thank you for listening.
Now we invite Dr. G. Saubhagya, Assistant Professor, Department of Education, Karnataka State Akkamadevi Women's University, Vijayapura, India, to kindly present her paper. Madam, please.
G. Saubhagya, working as an assistant professor in the Department of Education from Karnataka State Akkamadevi Women's University, Vijayapur. So the title of the paper that today I'm going to present in this international conference is The Impact of Online Education on Student Learning. Why I selected this title, that is The Impact of Online Education on Student Learning, is because online education has emerged as one of the powerful innovative study methods that have been introduced in the pedagogy field for the next new education technology, because this era has become as a technology era. So in the past few years, if you look back to the history or in the past few years, there has been a very great shift in the training methods and in the learning methods. Students can learn now at the present situation. Students can learn wherever they are. They can sit at home and they can learn by using the internet and the computers. The human experience of online education is changing rapidly, and not only it is changing in the schools or colleges, it is changing rapidly all over the world in all the schools, colleges, and the universities. So let us start by looking towards the introduction. So in the introduction part, we will be seeing that what is the backdrop of this online education. So students learn in variety ways. So some prefer online classes and others prefer classroom settings, because many people, they prefer that by sitting at home, they think that we can study at home by using the computers, by using the laptops, by using the internet connections, we can sit at home and we can learn the things. But some likes and prefers the classroom settings, and there are some students, a few students, where we can see that they like both the classroom settings and as well as the online classes. And both for the classroom settings and online classes, there are the pros and cons in the form of learning, which means we cannot say that this is the correct way of learning, online classes is the correct way of learning, or the classroom setting is the correct way of the learning. Both have the strength and weaknesses, and both have the advantages and disadvantages. But in a world where nearly everything is going down the technology path, online learning may be the first time the best way. So when we look towards the technology part, we can see that online learning is the best way where we can impart the education to the children, either in the schools or in the colleges and in the universities. So we live in a time where the world is turning towards the technology, and we can see that everybody is carrying the cell phones. Before, in the early days, we used to say that if anybody is having a phone or mobiles, we used to say that they are very rich and like. But nowadays we can see that everybody is carrying the cell phones, and we can see it is with everybody. Cars are running on electricity and TVs are being considered as in smart. The step in receiving an education has also jumped onto the technology train. With thousands of options to gain an education online, it's only a matter of time until online education becomes the only way to gain an education. If you look towards the present situation during this COVID-19, we see that even in the schools and colleges and even universities, UGC, MHRD, they are giving the directions that we should go for the online teaching. And at the same time, you can see that there are many people where they cannot afford for the online classes because of the lack of internet connections, and some are very poor, they cannot go for more than 1 GB. If we engage the class for 40 minutes, like if we go on Zoom for 40 minutes, for 40 minutes there they have to spend 700 MB, like where the candidate, they cannot afford more than 1 GB. They'll be having a package of 1 GB per day. So when we say to the students that we want to engage the classes online, so then it becomes a difficult because per day we will be engaging 3 or 4 classes from where they can afford. There are both pros and cons, but there are certain things where we can see that during this pandemic, this online education has helped for many people. So it has become the only way to gain an education. But is online education the right answer? Arguments can be made for the both the side, but what is ultimately comes down is an thing that individual preferences in receiving their education. So each individual has got their own preferences. So if we go to the Western countries, online teaching has gained a lot of importance. Nowadays, Swayam has come up, MOOC courses has come up where we are sitting at home and we are learning and we are getting the certificates. Only thing is that we have to go and write the examinations in Swayam. But whereas in MOOC courses, by sitting at home, there are some courses like Open Era course or Open to Study, Coursera, where we can sit at home, learn the things and get our certificates in certain courses like certificate courses or some degree courses like. So it goes with the individual preferences. So, what is the objective of the study? What is the main objective? The main objective of this study is to explore the impact of online education on student learning. How this is getting impact over the student. And this study helps both the students and teachers to know the impact of online education on student learning. It we are not concentrating here only from the part of the student learning. So we are looking towards both the side, how it is helping towards the students and how it is helping towards the teacher, how both it is impacting on both the teachers and the students. In this study, interactive activities such as teacher-student interaction, student-student interaction, student content interaction, and student technology interactions are considered. The common elements underlying all types of online learning is the use of computer networks, whether it is global internet or local campus connection that we are going to look over here. And there are three major factors against online education, that is face-to-face interaction. So even in the classroom settings, we see that if the individual prefers that we go for the classroom settings. There is also face-to-face interaction, and even in the online courses, we see the face-to-face interaction. This is one of the biggest impacts that online education has in society, and we can call it as a social impact. And self-discipline. The most factor for online education is the ability to go at your own pace. So you can sit at your own respective places and you can get your education and you will get a knowledge and self-drive. And in this, the most significant factor of online education is the impact that it has on the environment, or rather the effects that it has for the environment. Both the side we can see that it has got face-to-face interactions, and there is a self-discipline and there is a self-drive. And what are the strengths of the online education? So there are many reasons why online program has become a popular form of a distance learning in higher education today. So we see that higher education is going towards the online courses, and it has grabbed an importance towards this online courses. And there are some lists where I have mentioned over here. So online, what is the strength of this online learning? So you can sit anywhere and you can learn at any time. So there is no particular time, like if you go for the Coursera or Open to Study courses or anything, there is no particular time. The person who is the director, they will update the content courses, and we can access any time, and we can learn the things, and we can download, and there is online assignments, online quizzes where we can submit everything on online only. So anytime we can sit and study in the online courses. And synergy, and there is a high quality dialogue in the online learning. So we'll learn to use the technology. Now the world is a technology era. We learn to use the technology, and we can cope up with this present society also, present world. And it is student centered. Online education is completely on the student centered. If you go to the schools and colleges also, even in the universities, we can see that Online education is completely on the student centered based and access to the resources. What kind of resources? There are so many resources that you will get. If you click on online education, you will get n number of resources if you go to the Google. So you get number of the things where you can search what is there in the online education, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what are the advantages, what are the disadvantages, what are the pros, what are the cons of this online education, whether online education has got a good impact on the society or whether the online education has got a bad impact on the society, whether online education is a trend for this new era, whether technology is helping, all these things we can access to the resources through this online technology only. And there will be creative teaching. There won't be any monotonous. Now I'm using this technology. So this technology will help us. So side by side, we can see the person can see the video that okay, who is presenting this paper. We can see that person also, and at the same time, we can see the PowerPoint presentation also. The points that we have made over here. So PowerPoint presentation along with the audio and video both are coming together. So this technology, there is a creative thing, and we can use the animation also while teaching it to the students, and we can upload the audios also, we can upload the videos also, where they can sit at home and they can watch and they can get the knowledge. So in online teaching there are so many strengths we can see. At the same time, we cannot look at only one part, we have to look towards both the part. So there is weaknesses also in the online learning. So there are weaknesses inherent in the use of this medium that can pose potential threat to the success of any online program. So there are few problems that have mentioned over here. Equity and accessibility to the technology. So if we see towards the remote areas, we see that there are students where they cannot access to the technology, where they don't have the internet sources, where they don't get connectivity also. Their poor network connection will be there. So we see that there are some failures in the accessibility of this online learning. So when we come towards this virtual preferences in the classroom teaching, everybody will come together, gather together and sit and learn the things. So we see that both the pros and cons of this online teaching. So we are looking towards the weakness of this online learning. Computer literacy. One should be good with the computer technology. So nowadays, if we are highly educated, if we have got MA, PhD, PDF, and if we have got all the degrees also, postdoctoral fellowship also, and masters also, if we don't know the computer, then we are called as a computer illiterates. We have to upgrade ourselves with this new technology. If you take 1 or 2 decades back, if you look towards, if you ask our teachers, they are not good with the technology, where they say that they're fine with the talk and chalk method. But now we have got used towards this technology, and we should not depend so much on technology where the if the power get off, we cannot go with the class in the classrooms with other things. We should be well versed with both the technology and with the talk and chalk method also. So computer literacy is very much important for the upgradation. So in the weakness part, we see that there is a lack of computer literacy. Then limitation of technology. There is a limitation of technology in the classroom, like bodily language. We have to sit at one place and we have to teach in the online learning. But whereas in the classrooms, you can go around and you can grab the concentration of the student, and you can make the student to be active. But whereas in the online learning, you will not come to know that whether the student is actively listening or not. If they switch off the video, if they don't switch on the video, we will not come to know whether the student is listening or not. So there is a limitation of technology also. We cannot access to everything. Maybe in the future days we may get the access to see whether what the student is doing, whether the student is active in the class or not, whether the student has listened or not. But there is a lack of essential online qualities. We can see that there is a lack of essential online qualities and administration and faculty. And if you look towards this administration and faculty also, we can see that there are certain weaknesses in online learning. We cannot say that okay, we give some assignment to the faculty, we give some assignment to the administrative part. And when we ask the faculty to engage the classes, they say that okay, we have done the classes and we have engaged the classes and we have finished our portions. We don't know whether that particular faculty has engaged the classes or not. We don't have any data, but we can log in and log out. That we can do. But whether we don't know whether all those this student has got the access to these classes and or not, all those things we can see that there are certain weaknesses in the online teaching also. There are strengths also, there are weaknesses also. Let us look towards what are the advantages of online learning. Online courses are flexible. Like in the strength I have said that you can sit anywhere and anytime you can learn. So it is flexible, it is not rigid. Like in the classroom setting, if you say that morning 9 to 10 there is a class, you have to be there at 9 to 10. If you are engaging the classes on particular, like if I say that I am engaged in the classes on schools of philosophy, okay, in that morning 9 to 10 I will be engaging on the schools of philosophy, and 10 to 11 will be engaging the class on educational administration, and 10 to 11 will be engaging the classes on educational technology. But whereas in the online learning, the flexibility is that you can sit at any time, learn at any time. That flexibility is there. So you can sit and download the video during that particular time. Okay, 9 to 10 you can download the video and you can see the content at any time. And online courses are convenient. So it is convenient for many people to learn many things. Online courses bring education to your home. Now, nowadays in the present society, because of this technology, so education, online courses are bringing education to home. It is at our doorstep. So right from KG to PG, we can sit at home and learn many things through the online. So online courses offer more individual attention. So in the one particular classroom, we see that there are more than 50 to 60 students. But whereas in the online courses, there is a limitation. And at the same time, you can concentrate whether the student is concentrating or not, and we can view also. So it has more individual attention. And online courses promote lifelong learning. So education doesn't stop at particular era. So after completing our education, also after doing our MSc, PhD, and all those postdoctoral fellowship and senior research fellowship, also we can learn by sitting at home. We can learn so many courses through online. Like you can learn the certificate courses, you can go for the diploma courses, you can learn the computer courses, you can go for the food and nutrition courses. There are so many courses. There is no particular this where we can see that we have to learn this particular subject and we should have this particular degree to learn this course. But whereas in online courses, you can learn anything at any time. Online courses connect you to a global village. So we can reach out to many people right from the village to the city. Online course will help us to reach in every remote area. So at the same time, we look towards what are the disadvantages of online learning. Online courses require more time than on-campus classes. So a lot of preparation is required. When we see that online learning, so we need lot of requirement. We need to make in PowerPoint presentations. We need to make an animation. We need to upgrade ourselves with an audio and new technology and videos and everything. We should upgrade, and it needs lot of time for the preparation, and it requires more time than on campus classes. So when you say that we have at a particular time we have class, okay, morning, afternoon 2 to 3 we have got class means okay, finished. We prepare ourselves, go and finish our classes. But whereas in online this one, the main disadvantage is that it keeps popping up in our mind. Okay, we have to do this, we have to do this, and there will be n number of list where we'll be lacking so many things. So there are with advantages there are little disadvantages in online learning. Online courses require good time management skills. So in Zoom, if we say that if we purchase it, it goes more than 45 minutes. If we don't purchase it, it is 40 minutes. So when we log in, if the students log in at that particular time, it extends till 40 minutes. If not, one by one, if they keep on joining till the last minute also, by 40 minutes, the time will be over. And Every time we cannot start with the introduction, and every time we cannot start with the objectives. Once the time has gone, gone. So we should have good time management skills also if we say that we are going for the online learning. So online courses allows you to be more independent. Whereas in the offline courses, it is more of dependent. So in offline courses, we see that we are more dependent on the teacher. We are more dependent on other this one the libraries, and we are more dependent on one another. But whereas in the online courses, the one more thing that is, we can say that it is a plus point also. But the minus thing is that it has got disadvantage that we'll become more independent, like we are become a little careless also. Online courses may create a sense of isolation. There are more students together where they sit and talk and discuss the problems and understand by one another. So it will be more of isolation. So online courses require to be responsible for own learning. So in the classroom setup, we can, if we don't understand anything, if a student doesn't understand anything, they can raise the question, they can go for the discussion, and along with that discussion, one more person will add, whether the positive or negative, they will add one more thing. There will be a lot of discussion where ultimately we'll get counseling that a student has understood a topic. But whereas in this online learning, we see that the disadvantage is that it will become own learning. So in this own learning, there are many times we see that there is a failure, like we don't know the properly that whether the student has understood or not. So it is completely like an independent. So this is a kind of disadvantages. So till now we have seen that in the online courses, what is the impact of the online courses, what are the strength of the online courses, what are the weaknesses of the online courses, and what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages. So, so with this, I would like to conclude that online education is here to stay, that it may have effect on the society that may be determinantal, but those effects can be easily handled and worked around. We cannot say that, okay, only advantages are there, or only strength are there, or only weaknesses are there, only disadvantages are there. We cannot say that. We cannot only lean on towards only the positive things or only to the positive things. It has got both the pros and cons. So we can handle it and work around it for this online education. So it is, and online education is more of student centered only. Ultimately, the positive effects that online education has society outweigh the negative effects. When we concentrate more towards the positive effects towards the online education, the negative effects will naturally come down. There will be always in classroom setting offered at universities, but online education continues to grow on a larger scale every year. So every year we see that the enrollment is increasing in the online education rather than the offline education. So day to day, this technology is, as technology is blooming all around the world, we see that online education enrollment has become more. It is unexpected that online education will replace the in-classroom settings. So, but it is expected that it will continue to grow and to be a benefit to the society. It is expected that online education will replace the classroom settings. So maybe it may take another 2 decades where it may replace the classroom settings, and it will continue. But whatever it may be, it should benefit to the society. That is very much important, what we are seeing here. And institutions to higher education have found that online programs are essential in providing access to education for the population they wish to serve. In order for an online program to be successful, what is important here? The curriculum, the facilitator, the technology, and the student must be carefully considered and balanced in order to take full advantage of the strengths of this format, and at the same time avoid pitfalls that could result from its weakness. So from the beginning only I'm saying that there are both the things, positive and negative, in the online education. So at this pandemic, the main thing is that we have to look towards the uh, online education, because online education has brought a very great impact in the present society. So online education is helping almost all the sectors of the society, not only in our learning field but also in the job field also. We see that there is a work from home. So that also we have seen here. So with this, I conclude and I thank you one and all.
We invite Dr. Vandana Jain, Assistant Professor and Head Department of Psychology, SDM College Autonomous, Karnataka, and Ms. Ashwini Shetty, Research Scholar, Karnataka University, Dharwad, Karnataka, to kindly present their paper. Madam, please.
Hello everyone. Today we are going to present on a paper Impact of COVID-19 on Well-being of Indian Women. Myself, I am Dr. Vandana Jain, Assistant Professor and Head, Department of Psychology, SDM College, Ujjire, Karnataka. And my co-presenter is Ms. Ashwini S. Shetty, Research Scholar, Karnataka University, Dharwad, Karnataka. So let us see the introduction of this paper. The world is facing a global health crisis affecting people in a diverse and distract way. The pandemic COVID-19 has increased uncertainty and hence brought about unexpected change in the lifestyle of people. If we look into the meaning of COVID-19, coronaviruses are a large family of viruses that cause illness ranging from the common cold to more severe diseases. Common signs of infection include respiratory symptom, fever, cough, shortness of breath, or breathing difficulties. If we look into the severe cases, infection can cause pneumonia, severe acute respiratory syndrome, kidney failure, or even death. As the pandemic outbreak in India was ongoing, the government has taken decision to limit the case or to reduce the impact. They introduced a lockdown to India. Lockdown is an emergency protocol which basically means preventing public from moving from one place to another. If we look into the impact, focusing largely on the psychological impact of COVID 19, public experience severe anxiety, fear, depression, sense of loneliness, sleep disturbances, and emotion, anger, and aggressive can be observed. A survey conducted by Total Brain announced that 83% of women and 36% of men had experienced an increase in their depressive moods, and 53% of working women and 29% of working men has experienced an increase in their anxiety since February. Let us see what is the meaning of well-being. Well-being is defined by Oxford English Dictionary as the state of being uncomfortable, healthy, or happy. If we look into the different dimensions of well-being, mental well-being, it is something like good mental health, which is very crucial for the society for their crucial time. Distress due to the immediate health impact of the virus and the consequences of physical isolation, afraid of infection, dying, losing of family members, or physical distance from loved ones increased the mental disturbances. Rather, I can say that reduced the mental well being. So, we can say that when an individual is having poor mental well being, leads to stress, anxiety, frustration, and depression. If we look into the another dimensions of well-being, that is physical well-being, it includes lifestyle behaviors choices to ensure health, avoid preventable diseases and conditions, and to live in a balanced state of body, mind, and spirit. Physical activity and movement are extremely important during this period. Exercise helps an individual to release from stress, support the immune to increase weight control, flexibility, reduce health risk, and prevent diseases. A balanced diet or nutrition food can give permanent stability on good health and also increase the immunity, which is the main weapon to fight against corona. If we look into the third dimensions of well-being, that is social well-being. Social well-being is nothing but the appraisal of one's circumstances and functioning in society. Socially, we need to know that at this point of time, both families as well as any person in need is to be given equal importance. So, gender role. In 2000, the World Health Organization declared gender is to be a critical determinant of mental health as well as mental illness. Gender determines the differential power and control men and women have over the socio-economic determinants of their mental health and lives. If we look into the impact of COVID 19 on Indian women or gender female, the impact of COVID 19 in India is not gender neutral. It affects men and women differently. Experience from historic disease outbreaks and economic crisis suggests that women are likely to be impacted disproportionately. While men's immune system may be less equipped and fight against the virus, the socio-economic consequences of COVID-19 are stacking the deck against women. These effects are clearest in developing countries like India, where gender inequality is persisting challenge. So let us see why only women. So for that, I would like to request my co-presenter, Ms. Ashwini, to take forward. Thank you.
Good evening to all. Forwarding the paper that has been presented till now, why only women? As we all know, women is the basic sector or the main sector that has been vulnerable to various impact due to the COVID-19, and that is a purpose where we have taken this topic. The multi-layered effects of COVID-19 have been exacerbated for women and girls. And let's see into the brief that in the deep that various areas why only women. The first one is women being a primary caretaker at home. So she being a primary caregiver, all the responsibility has to be borne by her from the family. So the physical or the emotional elements of other family members becomes the women's responsibility. Moving the office to work at home arrangement, learning new technology, trying to maintain order with kids at home along with doing all their online schoolworks. And according to the studies, it has been said that because women in Indian families tend to eat last and the least, research has shown that financial strain and food shortages affects women's nutrition more than men's. The next area to see, exposure to domestic violence. Yes, as we all know, violence is not the new term. Basically, domestic violence is one of the sector where all psychologists as well as the society are fighting for women. But now, during this pandemic, it says that along with economic and social stresses, the vulnerability of women towards domestic violence has also been increased. Crowded homes, substance abuse, limited access to the services, reduced peer support, and the husband being unemployed or the inability to access towards the substance abuses. So all these hostility are loading towards the women in the home. So according to National Commission for Women, it had to launch a WhatsApp number beside the online complaints because of the increase of the domestic violence. The third area we are concentrating is the working women. As we all know, majority of women are working now for the sake of the family. But now in this pandemic, as we all know, the formal sector of the jobs have been transferred towards the home arrangement area. But for women, it has been a great challenge. Home and workplace atmosphere plays very major role in deciding the mental health status of the married working women. But then it also requires the conducive workplace atmosphere, and in the home arrangement, the main thing what women require is the favorable attitudes of husband and in-laws at home. But unfortunately, many working women now are in the trouble because of this. The next area we are talking is the financial breakdown of women. Globally, women's personal finances are weaker when compared to that of men. And that another reason can be the women being working in informal sector, where the options like working from home or the virtual workspaces are not viable. So according to Public Affairs Center study, it has been said that 60% of women are employed in the informal sector. And due to inequalities or in access to technology and skills, women will be the first ones to be removed from the job. The next is the problems on pregnant women. Pregnancy is the period usually all the women will expect a lot of support and medical services. But unfortunately, COVID-19 has resulted in all these inabilities. Pregnant women and new mothers are at elevated risk of suffering from mental health problems. So according to the survey, 10 to 35% of women will suffer from the depression during pregnancy and postpartum. Limited access to the health services. So all these problems are arising due to the main problem, that is limited access to the health services. This not only helps or troubles towards the physiological health of women, but also psychological health of the women, because they are experiencing the chronic distress. And in the overall view of the paper, what we can tell is the psychological impact of COVID-19 on women. Women are trapped in an escalating cycle of tension, power, and control, who are all vulnerable to experiencing various mental health concerns, which includes depression, anxiety, and trauma. Stigma and lack of or the social support lead to the internalization of the abuse, where women may develop some suicidal thoughts in them. So being a mental health professional, it's our responsibility to watch out this and sort out. So in conclusion, we are all in the midst of transformational times, and mental health and well-being of whole societies have been severely impacted by this crisis and need to be prioritized and addressed urgently. To specify, women in any society symbolize the growth of that society, and girl child is one of the most important section of the society. So, providing an equal opportunity, strengthening with positive support, appreciating the ability, encouraging the good work, these all can impact positively towards the women well-being. The problems affecting the women need to be considered and suitable measures to be taken. So, these are all the few references that we have taken or considered. Leave and let leave. Thank you.
We invite Dr. Hargunit Kaur, Assistant Professor, Christ University, Delhi NCR, to kindly present her paper. Madam, please.
Good evening, everyone. The research work which I am presenting today is actually a joint work done by Dr. Hargunit Kaur, Assistant Professor, Christ University, Delhi NCR, that is me, and Dr. Anuradha Bhandari, Professor, Punjab University, Chandigarh. The topic that I'm going to talk on today is professional quality of life and its psychosocial correlates. Professional quality of life refers to the quality one feels in relationship to the work as a helper. It is composed of two components. These are compassion satisfaction and compassion fatigue. Compassion satisfaction is the positive index of professional quality of life, while compassion fatigue is the negative index of professional quality of life. Compassion fatigue is further divided into two components. One is burnout and the second one is secondary traumatic stress. Compassion satisfaction occurs when one is optimistic about one's capabilities of being able to make a significant positive difference in one's organization or to the people at large. It is a sense of achievement and is regarded as the degree to which the caregiver is satisfied with the quality of services and care provided by him or her. Burnout is regarded as a continuous loss of idealism and enthusiasm, which is a consequence of individual or work-related stress. Individuals experience burnout when they feel their efforts are not bringing the desired results. Excessive workload and minimal support from the colleagues are linked to high feelings of burnout. These are some of the symptoms of burnout as given by Figley: fatigue and sleep-related issues, constant worry, having a pessimistic outlook, engaging into defensive behaviors, being cynical of others, keeping away from patients, resorting to drugs or alcohol, giving up of tasks or assignments, difficulty in concentrating, isolation, and absence of humor. Secondary traumatic stress, which is the third dependent variable taken in the present study. It is a behavior and emotion resulting from a desire to help another person who has been through significant painful experiences in his or her life. Emotional separation acts as a buffer against secondary traumatic stress. and prevents the helping professional from being driven away with the trauma of the patient. These are three correlates that I have taken actually: self-efficacy, empathy, and aggression. And these also served as the independent variables in the multiple regression, which was taken up after the correlation. Self-efficacy refers to an optimistic belief about oneself. Empathy is emphasized as the cognitive facet, which refers to the intellectual or imaginative apprehension of another's condition or state of mind. Mehrabian and Epstein also highlighted the emotional aspect of empathy. Aggression is the delivery of an aversive stimulus from one person to another with an intent to harm and with an expectation of causing such harm when the other person is motivated to escape or avoid the stimulus. Aggression may be overt or it may be covert in nature. Now, after reviewing the literature, these were some of the research gaps which were identified. Bhutani et al. Expressed concern over paucity of research on the professional quality of life of healthcare professionals in the Indian context. Chakrabarti et al. Opined that burnout in psychiatric nurses is understudied, particularly in India. Masutolo et al. Posited that few studies have investigated the relationship of negative emotional state of anger with burnout. There is insufficient clarity in the literature on secondary traumatic stress as well as on compassion fatigue. Cieslak et al. Have argued that few studies have explored the relationship between self-efficacy and secondary traumatic stress in health professionals. Three hypotheses which were derived after the review of literature as well as the research gaps which were identified. First hypothesis is that compassion satisfaction is positively related to self-efficacy, while burnout and secondary traumatic stress are negatively related to self-efficacy. Second hypothesis was compassion satisfaction is positively related to perspective taking, fantasy seeking, empathic concern, and negatively related to personal distress dimension of empathy. Burnout and secondary traumatic stress, on the other hand, are negatively related to perspective taking and empathic concern. They're positively related to fantasy seeking and personal distress dimension of empathy. Third hypothesis states that compassion satisfaction is negatively related to physical aggression, verbal aggression, anger, and hostility, while burnout and secondary traumatic stress are positively related to all the factors of aggression. So participants which were taken up in this study, there were 100 female nurses in the age range of 23 to 35 years, having 2 to 4 years of experience, that is primarily less years of experience. These nurses were taken from different hospitals, urban private hospitals of Patiala and Rajpura cities located in Punjab city. The study was performed with all due ethical considerations. Informed consent was obtained from all the participants. Hospital authorities and the nurses were ensured of the confidentiality of their responses. Rationale for taking this sample, that is only female nurses, only nurses coming from urban areas and working in private hospitals. The rationale was that there are some studies which suggest that there are differences in the organizational setup and working conditions of private and public hospitals. Studies have also reported differences in the severity of burnout symptoms in public and private mental health providers. Therefore, in the present investigation, nurses working only in the private hospitals were included in the sample. Due to differences in professional quality of life of nurses serving urban and rural areas, only nurses working in the urban areas were taken in the study. Some studies have reported significant differences in the professional quality of life of nurses with different levels of experience. Therefore, in the present study, nurses with 2 to 4 years of experience were taken. Procedure: initially, a survey was carried out to identify private multi-specialty hospitals which employed a minimum of 15 nurses. So, permission was taken from all these hospitals. Survey was conducted and it was identified that there are 608 female nurses working in these hospitals. Nurses with 2 to 4 years of experience were identified, and considering their schedule, they were contacted personally. For some nurses, 2 to 3 sessions were taken. For some, only one session was sufficient to obtain the data. On an average, it took 30 to 40 minutes for a nurse to complete all the tests. These were the tests which were taken up in the study. This table displays the demographic variables of the sample taken. So you can see that in terms of age, primarily the nurses which made the sample, they belong to the category of 23 to 29 years of age range. Qualifications, primarily these nurses had GNM qualification. Marital status, most of these nurses were married. They were working in different units and wards such as CCU, dialysis, emergency, endoscopy, gynecology, ICU, NICU, OPD, etc. Length of time working in current unit or ward. So majority of these nurses, they have been working in the present ward for less than 2 years, 2 to 4 years. 46 of these nurses have been working in this present ward for 2 to 4 years of 2 to 4 years. And nature of shifts. Majority of these nurses were working all the 3 shifts. Expected time to work in nursing profession. Majority of them stated that they will like to work in this profession for lifetime. Religious beliefs, yes and no. 85 of these nurses said that yes, they have faith in God and they have faith in their religion. Now this table shows the mean, standard deviations and the correlations which were obtained. Compassion satisfaction, CS, was found to be negatively related to B, that is burnout, positively related to SE, that is self-efficacy, positively related to PT, perspective taking. Burnout B was found to be positively related to SDS, that is secondary traumatic stress, negatively related to SE, that is self-efficacy, negatively related to PT, that is perspective taking, positively related to physical aggression, PA, verbal aggression, BA, anger, A, and H, that is hostility. Secondary traumatic stress was found to be negatively related to PT, that is perspective taking. Then positively related to FS, that is fantasy seeking, positively related to personal distress, PD, and positively related to anger and hostility. These are the predictors of professional quality of life. For the criterion variable compassion satisfaction, self-efficacy was only the only significant predictor which was found in the present study. It explained 14% of variance in the criterion variable. In case of burnout, perspective taking was found to be a negative predictor of burnout. Hostility was found to be a positive predictor. Self-efficacy was found to be a negative predictor. Together, all these 3 variables explained 27% of variance in burnout. In case of secondary traumatic stress, fantasy seeking and hostility were found to be significant predictors. Both of these were positive predictors of secondary traumatic stress. Together, they explain 16% of variance. Criterion variable. Now, there were some limitations of the present study that the data was obtained only from 2 cities, which limited the generalizability of results. Both married and unmarried females were taken as participants in the present study. Perhaps the marriage institution increased their coping ability and therefore had an indirect impact on their professional quality of life. These are the conclusions and implications. Nurses who fantasized were found to experience greater degree of secondary traumatic stress. Perhaps nurses with less years of experience transpose themselves in the stressful situations of their patients, which ultimately reduces self-other distinction, resulting in secondary traumatic stress in them. Keeping in view the results of the present study, it is proposed that a training program be developed by hospitals to improve the professional quality of life of these nurses. The aim of these programs would be to promote high self-efficacious beliefs in these nurses, resulting in high levels of compassion satisfaction and low levels of burnout and secondary traumatic stress. Methods to develop empathetic skills and perspective taking ability and empathic concern to decrease burnout can be initiated. Some future suggestions based on the study conducted. This study may be repeated again with a larger sample of nurses. It would be interesting to compare correlates of professional quality of life of nurses with less years of experience with those with more years of experience. Relatively less research attention has been given to compassion satisfaction. This is the positive aspect of professional quality of life. Therefore, more research needs to be done in this area. Future research should focus on increasing compassion satisfaction in the helping professionals. Thank you very much.
We invite Dr. Sonia George, Assistant Professor in Psychology, Government College for Women, Tirunanthapuram, Kerala, India, to kindly present her paper. Madam, please.
Hello, hi everyone. First of all, let me thank the organizers of this conference for the hard work and dedication they have shown to make this conference happen. Let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Sonia George, working as Assistant Professor in Psychology at Government College for Women, Trivandrum, Kerala, which is the southernmost part of India. Moving on to my study, the study is entitled as Appraisal of Childbearing Practices, a Gender Analysis. So we'll start with a very short introduction of this topic. The importance of family has long been recognized in any area of study, let it be any area of research. Family and the role of parents has long been recognized. Parents are considered to be the strongest influence in a child's life and in a child's development. In every area of research, let it be any subject related to development, the parent-child interactions has been an area of many research, and intense interest has been shown in the area of parent-child interactions, especially by psychologists. The main variable of our study is child-rearing practices, which is commonly referred to as parenting, and it is defined here as a generalized term used to refer to the characteristic ways of handling or dealing with one's own children. In simple terms, it is the manner in which parents bring up or rear their children. The objective of the study is to find out whether there is any gender differences in the appraisal of childbearing practices, and the hypothesis formulated is there will be significant gender differences in the appraisal of childbearing practices. So in order to measure the childbearing practices, a sample of 650 teenagers were selected from different schools and colleges in Kerala. Out of this, 331 were males and 319 were females. And the tools used were child-rearing practices scale, which was a student appraisal form constructed by the author and her guide in the year 2006. A personal data schedule was also given along with the main tool. The child-rearing practices scale consisted of 13 sub-variables with a total of 104 items, and items were in the form of self-descriptive statements. The 13 variables have been shown in this slide, and all the variables were measured in a 5-point scale. The participants had to respond as strongly agree, undecided, disagree, and strongly disagree. The data collection, as said earlier, it was done from different schools and colleges in the state of Kerala. A total of 820 data were collected, out of which 170 had to be discarded. And finally, the sample size was 650. The scoring was done, the coding was done, and the data was subjected to statistical analysis. The main analysis one done was a t-test, and the t-test showed significant gender differences in child-rearing practices appraisal. See, as said earlier, the 13 sub-variables were measured for each parent, both father and mother. So the sub-variables thus came to a total of 26, that is 13 variables for father and mother that made a total of 26 sub-variables. And there was a difference in the mean scores of all the child-rearing practices. There was a gender difference in the mean scores of all the child-rearing practices variables. Except in one variable, females scored a higher mean score than the males, and that one variable was responsibility. Coming on to the details of the results, and when we did the t-test, it was found that except for 7 sub-variables, all the 19 sub-variables were found to have significant difference in the two genders. The seven subvariables which did not show significant gender differences were acceptance shown by father, reward given by mother, understanding shown by both father and mother, encouragement shown by both father and mother, and rapport shown by father. See, in all the other 19 variables, as I said, females scored significantly higher than males in all the other 19 variables, except in one variable which was giving responsibility. In only in that variable, females scored significantly lower than the males. See, as given in the slide, these are the variables where females scored significantly higher than the males, and in the single variable, which was responsibility given to the children, females scored significantly lower. So that is something that we have to focus specifically. Females in Kerala are given all the other child variables or all the other parenting variables are perceived by the child, the girl child, as more than that given to the males, except the parents are hesitant to give responsibility to the females. And that single thing has to be changed when it comes to the to parenting. Parents should give more responsibilities to the girl child to make the girl child more equipped with all the life skills, so that the girl child will be able to lead a even more effective life, a more successful life. So our conclusion of the study was that significant difference was shown in the appraisal of parenting when it comes to both males and females. Significant gender differences were found in 19 subvariables of child rearing practices, except, as I said, except in responsibility given by both father and mother. So that comes to the end of my presentation. Thank you all for your patient listening.
We now invite Ms. Sonam Chandok, Junior Research Fellow, DIPR DRDO, Timarpur, Delhi, to kindly present her paper. Madam, please.
A very good morning to one and all present here. I will be presenting the paper titled Addressing the Psychosocial Risk Factors Associated with Non-Communicable Diseases. Now, as we know that non-communicable diseases are on the rise, and according to WHO's report, it accounts for almost 71% of deaths across the world and 63% of deaths in India. So, the objective of this paper is to outline the psychosocial factors associated with non communicable diseases and to understand and explore the scope of mental health professionals such as psychologists and social workers in control and management of non communicable diseases. Now, first of all, we should understand what are communicable diseases and what are non communicable diseases. So, communicable diseases are those that are infectious in nature and they can be transmitted from one organism to another. They are caused by some biological agent, and some of the examples of communicable diseases are measles, chickenpox, cholera, tuberculosis, common cold, AIDS, etc. Uh, Non communicable diseases, on the other hand, are non infectious in nature and they cannot transmit from one organism to another. They are not caused by a single agent, and they can manifest as a consequence of biological, genetic, or environmental factors. And that is why they are also known as multi causation diseases. Some of the examples of non communicable diseases are diabetes, hypertension, stroke, cancer, etc. Now, when we talk about non communicable diseases or when we just talk about health, we have seen that in recent times there have been a paradigm shift in the perspectives of health. So, in ancient times, mind and body were considered to be separate and unrelated. But over a period of extensive research, it was understood that mind and body are not separate but are intertwined and are interlinked. This paradigm shift has brought attention to the environmental and social factors that were earlier ignored in understanding health, and that is why WHO defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So, in recent times, the shift has been seen from biomedical model to biopsychosocial model, and we see that health uh, is not just seen from the perspective of just being a physical illness, but also other environmental factors and social factors are considered when we define health. So earlier, biomedical model was very much in use, which was an early model of physical illnesses, and it views physical conditions and diseases on the basis of bodily, biochemical, or neurophysiological processes. Whereas biopsychosocial model is a contemporary model of physical illness, and it views physical conditions and diseases as a manifestation of biological, psychological, and social factors. Now, when we say that non-communicable diseases and psychosocial, and there are certain psychosocial factors related to it, we can trace these linkages at three levels. First is when we look at the risk factors of non-communicable diseases that are psychosocial in nature. Then we look at the psychosocial consequences associated with non communicable diseases. And thirdly, we look at the interventions that we can design for management and control, which are psychosocial in nature. Now, when we talk about risk factors, we and psychosocial risk factors, it is basically we are talking about those factors that are modifiable in nature. So, some of them include stress, physical inactivity, poor dietary habits, disturbed sleep pattern, alcoholism and smoking, risky drug use, and poor health seeking behavior. Now, when we talk about stress, we know that stress leads to physiological changes in the body. Increased heart rate and blood pressure are common physiological reactions to a stressful event. And stress leads to the production of stress hormones like cortisol. Neurotransmitters such as epinephrine and norepinephrine are also produced excessively in case of chronic stress, which suppresses the immune system. In fact, stress is also known to decrease the production of natural killer cells that are responsible for natural destruction of viruses and tumor cells in the body. Thus, stress may not directly cause cancer, but it makes it more difficult for the body to fight cancerous cells or tumor growths. Chronic stress brings about a fluctuation in the bodily systems, and long-term stress actually acts as a risk factor for some of the non-communicable diseases such as cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and cancer. And now, when we talk about physical activity and dietary habits, these are other factors which are modifiable and are also found to be associated with the occurrence of non-communicable diseases. So, it has been found by researchers that physical inactivity and poor dietary habits uh, lead to the development of diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, hypertension, and obesity. Similarly, alcoholism and smoking are also the leading cause of some of the non-communicable diseases such as lung cancer, coronary heart disease, hypertension, stroke, etc. Alcohol intake and tobacco use increases the level of triglycerides, which further elevate the risk of coronary heart disease. And according to WHO, a large percentage of non-communicable diseases can be prevented by controlling tobacco and alcohol use. Now, due to the lack of awareness and lack of access to healthcare facilities, people often refrain from seeking help when they feel ill, and this actually leads to poor health seeking behavior. Due to poor health seeking behavior, there is a delayed diagnosis which leads to delayed treatment. And diseases at a beginning stage are easier to manage and may have a better prognosis. Thus, poor health seeking behavior may lead to exaggerated symptoms that are difficult to manage at a particular stage. This risk factor is also modifiable and calls for greater awareness and health promotion in the communities. Now, some of the psychosocial consequences that are associated with non communicable diseases are low quality of life, reduced life satisfaction, social exclusion, increased health anxiety, decline in cognitive functioning, mental health disorders such as depression and anxiety. In brackets, there are some of the example of researchers who have worked on these areas. Now, finally, we would like to work at the third level of knowing the relationship between the psychosocial factors associated with non-communicable diseases. So we talk about role of psychologists and social workers in control and management of non-communicable diseases. So first of all, we talk at the individual level that how we can incorporate this biopsychosocial perspective when we deal with cases of non-communicable diseases. So, at individual level, we should make an assessment of not just physical status of the client, but also physical and mental health status of the client. Then we should develop collaborative goals to counter the modifiable risk factors. And we can employ behavioral and cognitive strategies for behavior modification and health promotion. One of the approaches that is gaining momentum in the recent times is the cognitive retraining approach, and it refers to the strategies that are planned with the objective of disputing irrational thoughts and beliefs of an individual by conceptualizing their automatic thoughts and core beliefs. So basically, cognitive behavior therapy, what we say in psychology, is actually an umbrella term which incorporates other therapies like Beck's cognitive therapy and rational emotive behavior therapy. So these therapies involve certain techniques such as self-monitoring activities, reinforcement for positive behavior, modeling, behavioral assignments, and automatic thought records. So when we use these strategies in CBT, these can actually help us in addressing the attitudinal issues, and when we design such interventions that help us change the attitude and the irrational thoughts of a person, we can actually then it can actually then lead to a behavioral change which can ultimately lead to health promotion and better health seeking behavior. Now, at a group or community level, we should develop collaborative goals to counter modifiable risk factors. We can plan interventions to impart awareness to the public regarding the causes and consequences of non-communicable diseases. Then awareness about the availability of healthcare facilities to increase its access and usage to enhance health-seeking behavior of people. So these are some of the brief outline of the role that psychologists and social workers can play. So these are some of the references that we have used in this presentation, and thank you so much.
Now we invite Ms. Deena Balakrishnan, Department of Psychology, Government College for Women, Tirunanthapuram, Kerala, to kindly present her paper.
Hello everyone, my name is Deena Balakrishnan. I'm a research scholar doing my research under the guidance of Dr. Sonia George, Department of Psychology, Government College for Women, Tirunanthapuram, Kerala. The paper that I'm going to present today is titled as Factors Affecting School Counselor Effectiveness and Its Impact on Students. Introduction. Since the inception of mankind, seeking help when in crisis is quite a normal way of survival. The field of counseling provides help to heal psychological wounds and acts as a sounding board for moving forward. The primary goal of counseling is supportive listening, that is, to provide clients with a sense of being understood and affirmed. Counseling has become a game changer in the education sector. The rapid social changes caused by urbanization and overindulgence in internet-related activities nowadays seems to affect not only the adults but also children. This means that counseling should start early in schools and should continue to enable individuals to meet vocational and personal problems of adjustment in later life. Effective school counselors are important for improving student achievement and their overall well-being. School counselors provide counseling sessions in areas such as academic, career-related, personal, and social. The major objective of the process of school counseling is to help students become self-sufficient, self-dependent, self-directed, and to adjust themselves efficiently to the demands of a better and meaningful life. Studies conducted by American Counseling Association have shown that school counseling interventions have helped students overcome behavioral addictions, stress related to academics, and has enhanced students' overall development. Need for the study. Counseling effectiveness largely depends on the effectiveness of the counselors who provide the counseling session. According to the World Health Organization, the highest suicide rates are observed in adolescents. Students are vulnerable to psychosocial problems and behavioral addictions and often need expert timely intervention. Thus, the societal expectation on school counselor effectiveness increases exponentially. However, school counseling services was observed to be negatively affected by lack of resources and training in guidance and counseling and non-counseling duties performed by school counselors. Since effectiveness has not been formally investigated at ground level, and as there is an increasing number of problems which students face in modern society, the researcher felt compelled to explore the factors affecting counselor effectiveness from their point of view. Empirical studies have shown that students' perception of a counselor also played a pivotal role for an effective counseling. Apart from this, the following factors also affect the counselor service rendered at schools, such as the nature of recruitment, knowledge about counseling services, issues faced by counselors such as rapport establishment, privacy, insufficient training, etc. Many surveys on school counseling focused on training needs of school counselors and how to improve their training programs so that counselors can work more effectively with developed skills. In the light of available empirical studies, the objective formulated for the present study is to explore the various factors that affect school counselor effectiveness. Method. The sample consisted of 20 school counselors belonging to different schools in Trivandrum district of Kerala. Among the 20 counselors, 13 belonged to government schools and 4 from aided schools, out of which 13 schools were located in urban areas. The total counselors fall in an age range of 27 to 49 years respectively. The data was collected using School Counselor Questionnaire, a self-constructed instrument which incorporated the personal details of the counselors and also their views and perceptions regarding the effectiveness of a counselor. The rest of the questionnaire included questions related to their personality characteristics and perceptions towards the role of a school counselor. Further, these counselors were interviewed to understand their subjective interpretation of the school counselor questionnaire, and these responses were qualitatively analyzed using content analysis. Results and discussion. In the light of empirical studies, the various roles of school counselors, which is expected to be crucial for an effective counseling, were explored. From the exploration, it was understood that the awareness of counselors regarding how counseling should be done and how effectively they are able to perform as a counselor is highly pivotal. In addition, the following factors were also found to be crucial for a counselor to render an effective service, such as personality characteristics of the counselor, perception of the importance of the role of a school counselor, amount of training acquired in counseling, location of the counseling room, attitude of the client, the counselor's agreements and disagreements on various duties of the counselor's satisfaction with the facilities available at school. The result also revealed that majority considered job satisfaction, feedback, infrastructure, availability of tests, influence of other faculty, etc. indeed affected the effectiveness of counselors. Conclusion. On the whole, the study found that several psychosocial factors affect the effectiveness of school counselors in counseling. The present study helps to understand that counseling effectiveness not only depends on the effectiveness of the counselors alone, but also on the various other factors which may act as barriers to effective counseling. This in turn may affect the beneficiaries of their service, which happens to be the student community. Therefore, to enhance counselor effectiveness, the factors identified from the present study needs to be taken under consideration. These are the references. Thank you.
Now we invite Ms. Sarika A., Research Scholar, Department of Psychology, Government College for Women, Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala, to kindly present her paper. Madam, please.
Hi, I'm Sharika. I'm a research scholar. I'm from Kerala. I'm doing PhD in psychology in University of Kerala. And I'm going to start. So my title of my paper is Sex Differences in Film-Induced Emotion, a Narrative Review. Sharika A. and Dr. Sonia George, my guide, Department of Psychology, Government College for Women, Trivandrum, Kerala. The sex differences regarding emotional processing, it have been of great interest for years. Many researchers have been fascinated by these sex differences. And the empirical studies of sex differences in emotions, they have produced less consistent results that might be expected based on popular convictions. There are several myths and stereotypes about these differences. So, but the studies shows a less consistent results. A fairly substantial body of research has demonstrated that women are more emotionally expressive than men. However, it remains somewhat unclear whether the women experience more emotion than men or whether they show greater physiological changes associated with emotions. That is a problem. One of the most effective methods to study emotion is to induce emotions using films. They integrate both visual and auditory information, allowing the viewer simultaneously receiving emotional cues from more than one sensory modality. So film is considered as one of the most effective methods to induce emotions. If we have to study about emotion, sex differences in emotions or other variables, we can use films. And about the sex differences in emotion, past research has uncovered there is stable differences between men and women in emotion. So my objective is to collect and analyze the gender differences in film-induced emotional studies and to analyze the gender differences in emotion in terms of subjective response, physiological activity, and in expression of emotion, and to synthesize the complex interplay of sex and emotion from the studies. These are my objectives. So my method. To form an overview of studies, we reviewed studies from 1990 until December 2019. My databases are PsycInfo, Scopus, Empase, ACMDL, Medline, Web of Science, Sinon, PubMed, and Google Scholar. The search terms are film, movie, gender difference, sex difference, mood, affect, emotion, manipulation, elicitation, evoke, measure, induction. And the titles and abstracts of these were screened for 11s, and they were screened by the 2 investigators independently. My inclusion criteria. I have used studies which compare sex differences in induced emotion using films as an experimental design in non-clinical sample. A manipulation check of induced emotion using subjective report, physiological measure, and overt activity. These are the inclusion criteria for studies. And about the results and discussion, I got a total of 24 studies. They were annotated in terms of the research in referred journals. Following information were extracted, such as details of authors, year of publication, emotion type, findings regarding sex differences. These are the data that were extracted. And it is found that most of the studies, they have relied upon self-report methods, but which leave them vulnerable to the effects of gender stereotypes. Since they focus more on self-report methods, there may be a chance for including gender stereotypes. Among the 24 studies, gender differences in reactivity to the films were observed, except in 2 studies. Studies shows that women often report more intense emotional experiences than men. The gender difference in film rating, it is affected by the valence of there is differences in gender difference based on the valence of films, emotion type, and what kind of plot is used, visual and verbal factors. And first, in terms of subjective response, and we can explain it in terms of dimensional approach. Dimensional approach means we can explain in terms of arousal or valence or dominance. So it is found that women reported higher levels of emotional arousal than men when viewing video clip. More specifically, women seem to report higher levels of subjective arousal and higher levels of negative effect than men. And female participants, they judged both the unpleasant and the pleasant film as less pleasant and the unpleasant film as more arousing compared to male participants. And if we explain it in terms of discrete emotion, discrete approach, that is categorical approach, we can found that consistent results that women reported stronger feeling of fear, surprise, disgust, and sadness than men in watching film clips. And half of the studies shows that men shows high report on rating of excitement and amusement. No consistent result in higher rate of anger in men in response to anger inciting video clips. We haven't seen any type of higher anger expression or experience in men in response to video clips. So in case of anger, there is no sex differences. But there is sex differences in terms of fear, surprise, disgust, and sadness. Sadness is more pronounced than men in watching film clips. And these results in terms of dimensional approach and discrete approach, and they are consistent with the interpretation that females are more susceptible to negative life experiences and lowered mood, and they may have implications for the pathophysiology of mood disorders such as depression. And physiological activity. The evidence for gender differences in physiological responsiveness was limited. And the differences between men and women in physiological responses, it varied according to the emotion type, particularly for negative emotions, as like subjective response, in which women had greater reactivity to sad and disgust films. And that can be seen in skin conductance and heart rate. And if we explain it in terms of emotional expression, the sex difference was significant in emotional expression, indicating that women were more expressive than men across all films. And in terms of EMG activity, that is changes in corrugator and zygomatic activity and orbicularis activity, they were more pronounced in females than in males. That is all about emotional expression. And it is also found that these differences, they are not limited to specific emotions, and that the content of certain scenes in film clips, they may also produce different effects for males than for females. For example, in a rape scene, for a disgusting, eliciting video clips, there may be differences in response for males and females. We used subjective experiences, physiological responses, and expression also. But in order to gain more conclusive information on complex interplay of emotion and sex, brain imaging studies will also be included. And it is that these differences in sex differences in emotion, they can be attributed to the gender norms and stereotypes that exist in our culture. They do not only reflect social members' beliefs and observation, but also play a prescriptive role in shaping the members' experience and expression of emotions, as women become more emotionally experienced and expressive than men, confirming the gender norms and stereotypes. But while many of the differences between men and women in processing emotions may be attributable to social factors and learned patterns of behavior, it is likely that emotional differences also reflect genotypic differences in the sexual dimorphism of the nervous system. That is why I said that brain imaging studies can also be included in the studies. And conclusion. The present study contributes to I believe that the present study contributes to an expanded literature concerning the sex differences in emotion. Women often tend to report stronger emotional experiences and expression, particularly for negative emotions. And in some situations, they have also shown stronger physiological responses to films, although these findings are not consistent across studies.
Now we invite Miss Pavani Randoy, student 9th semester BBA LLB, JSS Law College, Autonomous Mysuru, Karnataka, to kindly present her paper. Madam, please.
Greetings to the panel present. This is Pavni Randeo. I'm from JSS Law College, final year student. I have done this paper with Ms. Swapna Patil. The paper is about harmonizing psychological disorders in the course of pandemic. The paper goes about, it focuses as on how the mental health of society has been impacted at the time of pandemic. It discusses the various reasons of anxiety caused during the pandemic. It further discusses how anxiety can lead to depression and how handling social isolation is important. And in the end, it says how COVID-19 is a trauma as PTSD. To start and begin with, Anxiety is characterized by excessive worrying and persistent free-floating anxiety. Some of the symptoms of anxiety are persistent nervousness, also referred as tensions, and restlessness or feeling on the edge, irritation, muscles feeling tense or tight, poor concentration, sleep disturbances. Now, in the time when we are living in pandemic, and we had lockdown 1. Now, earlier everyone thought that lockdown 1 is just gonna stay for 15 to 30 days maximum, and nobody thought that this disease can be so it can have such a huge impact on society, that we had lockdown 1, we had lockdown 2, we had lockdown 3, and people started feeling too anxious about it. They didn't know what else to do and how to go about it. Thus, anxiety plays a role to increase on stress levels as well. So, why anxiety happens? It is when you experience a major change in your life. Thus, COVID-19 is a major change in the entire society. So, obviously, it will impact a person's mental health and psychological health as well. Also, one person might feel anxiety due to death of a loved one, loss of a job, being diagnosed with serious illness, or turning to unhealthy ways of coping up with it, like maybe drinking too much or using of abusive drugs or overeating junk food. And in order to control all these things, it is important that we know what are the how can we handle social isolation. Now, By social isolation means when we have isolated ourselves from the entire society, we are not stepping out of our house, we are not going out to eat or meeting our friends. The world is revolving around Zoom meetings, and like we are right now having a webinar. So thus, this leads to people having stress, and people may not be able to cope up with it. To handle social isolation, it's better that we have a regular schedule by keeping our bodies and mind busy. And idle mind is a devil's workshop, as they say. And that is true, because if you let the negativity surround your mind, it will impact your mental health. Thus, we have to eat well, drink plenty of water or any good fluids to keep us hydrated. When we are working from home and we are sitting in front of the laptop for 12 hours straight, it's important we hydrate and we keep drinking water. Being physically active by doing minimal, simple indoor exercises, by showing care towards your loved ones that you're living with, your parents or your children, and ensuring that you help them also to cope up with stress. Kids of the age 5 to 6 cannot go out and play because it's scary and risky to go out and be there. Also, it is important to avoid intake of tobacco and alcohol, as it adds to anxiety levels. So thus, these are the few steps which can help us to handle social isolation very well. Moving on, the trauma of COVID-19. The pandemic has many potentials of sources of trauma, such as experiencing the death of a loved one. If a person who has got the virus and is admitted in the hospital, and unfortunately he passes away or she passes away, the family members cannot even visit the hospital to see the dead body for one last time, because the rule says that the government hospitals or any private hospitals have to cremate the body on themselves, because the potential of the virus is there and it might get transmitted. So it adds to a stress, and it adds to post-traumatic disorder, because let's say 2 months after the death, a person might still feel anxious that they couldn't say one last time goodbye. Also, there are 4 symptoms of PTSD, and they are like re-experiencing the trauma. You re-experience something that you've already experienced in a different manner, which is unhealthy again. Avoiding certain situations, like you get into a conflict and you trying to avoid certain situations. Experiencing negative changes in emotions and beliefs, like one person might lose their belief in a system or in an institution. Also, it is important to keep informed, to keep checking upon your friends or on your relatives or on your family. It is important to again have a routine, and the most importantly, minimize newsfeed. In the age of social media, we have to see that the WhatsApp University news is not the only way the news is spreading, and to have a legitimate sources, and to see the minimum news that is important is only that we are being getting. So in order to conclude, I'll say that extraordinary reality common to caregivers and first responders. We all are experiencing life and death situation, the crisis and loss of control. We don't have control over our lives at the moment. It continues. It has been continuing from past few months. Also, our personal strength and weaknesses are being exposed to the world. We have to focus on productive work. We have to focus on our loved ones. We have to display courage at least. If we are trying to be courageous and trying to fight the situation, we will be surrounded with positive notes and positive thoughts as well. The mounting stress from COVID-19 has become a threat of sickness and death, combined with the financial downturn and loss of income for so many, As we know, the COVID-19 has impacted the economy and that has resulted in people losing their jobs. Once a person loses their source of income, it is again stressful, both physically and emotionally. Thus, in a situation like this, we have to ensure that we are doing a minimum ways to cope up with our mental health, because mental health is an illness and we all have to accept it, and we all have to ensure that other person or the society in general is not drowning into depression or into anxiety or fear, because anxiety, fear and depression is the situation we are currently living in. So to ensure that we are not going there for a long term, it is very important. On that note, thank you for the time and thank you for hearing me.
Now we invite Miss P. Teresa Sampson, student of MA English, Acharya Nagarjuna University College of Arts, Commerce and Law, Guntur, Andhra Pradesh, to kindly present her paper. Madam, please.
Acharya Nagarjuna University, Guntur. Today's my paper is on COVID-19, its challenges in girl child education. This paper is written in regarding of the education system in India, especially in the context of education in Andhra Pradesh. COVID-19 is a pandemic which has left major challenges in world in every phase of life. Among them, child education is a major problem in every country and community all over the world. For full development of our human resources, the improvement of homes, and for molding the character of children during the most impressionable years of their infancy, the education of girls is of greater importance than that of boys. Most honored and worshipped gender is women, but they are suffering with many drawbacks like economic, academic, and social inequalities, and are deprived of many opportunities. Along with present unexpected challenges exposed due to COVID-19 become a major one. In a country like India, with high population, development depends on Human Development Index, which further decides the national income of the country. Human resources are not does not identify a single gender, but it includes all population in general. Thus, education for a girl child have its own importance in bringing women empowerment and enlighten the inclusion of women services to the society as well as to the country. So, in this study, it is proposed to observe the different problems like family, socio-economic conditions, and ethical, religious, and sentimental obstacles, along with the problem of COVID-19 in the light of different schemes and policy of government prevailing in contemporary period of girls. The objectives of the study of this paper are to study the problems pertaining to girl child education in different areas and policies, examine the impact of COVID-19 on girl child and drop-offs from early education. There are many challenges faced by girl in her education. I have divided them into two categories. The first category is before COVID, that has existed before COVID also. They are the cost of education, gender norms, poverty, early marriage, and pregnancy. Coming to the cost of education, though education should be free, the general status maintenance of an educated girl is considered as burden to the parents, apart from the other costs associated with sending children to school, like the cost of uniforms, textbooks, and bus fares, etc., which are too much to bear for a family living in poverty. And when coming to the gender norms, in general, our society has bifurcated the domestic duties based on the gender, which typically girls are asked to fetch the water, take care of their younger siblings, and to help the mother in their cooking and cleaning activities. Due to this, girls may not have the opportunity to attend school because their contribution to the household are valued more than their personal education, where parents are daily wage workers, which is common now in the backward class. Poverty. Coming to the poverty, the fight for the day-to-day bread deviates the idea of education even to a boy child. Thus, girl is no way exempted from these conditions. COVID-19 promotes this type of evils to economic drawbacks. On the other hand, girl children are very useful to the small vendors to helpful in their academic activities. Coming to the early marriage and pregnancy, early marriage is a common phenomenon still that prevails in the rural society, especially among the backward class people. When girls are forced to marry at young age, they are often pulled out of school at an early age, which causes the development and learning process. This affect the girl child education at the transition from primary to secondary education, which is turning point for girls to gain the life skill they need to escape the cycle of poverty. Pandemic horror gives an opportunity to promote the social evil in the name of poverty. Coming to the additional problems or additional challenges faced by the girl child due to the COVID are COVID-19 impact on education system and schooling. This is the pandemic COVID-19 has caused increase in number of dropouts due to the close down of schools and fear of community spread of the epidemic. So the present modern proposed system of online education is not feasible to more than 50% of students, not only in rural sectors but also in urban poor. It is brought every gross inequality among the students. And coming to the next challenge, it is the lack of readiness to face this sudden situation. Like, many teachers are unaware of the present technical and new system of teaching. So to get rid of this situation, it needs some more time and training to face this sudden challenge. So unconsciously, again, the students are segmented into two different groups, like the one privileged and unprivileged, and haves and not haves. So this is another challenge due to the COVID-19 for a girl child. And coming to the last COVID-19 challenge for a girl child is the COVID-19 crisis is unprecedented. The time only will tell. We don't know when this will end, but time only will tell what the implication of prolonged school closure will be. However, once schools are open, based on past trends, it will be critical to track school enrollment, daily attendance, and basic learning. So there are some few suggestions I have made. The suggestions are that schools has to be changed as safe zones from vulnerable condition through observing health and hygienic atmosphere by rationalizing the strength and modifying the infrastructure. So for this suggestion, the present Andhra Pradesh government has been taken necessary steps in the program called Nadu Nedu, which is a good model of other states. Next, coming to another suggestion, still there is no proper awareness even among elite people in Indian population. So it is very essential to educate through the schools and media how to cope up with pandemic disaster. Wide area of research should be taken place in to regain the learning loss that had happened due to online classes, which is not a regular habit any student at any level. Next one is loss of reading and writing skills absent in online classes is affecting Indian students at primary and secondary standards. Different ways should be searched to compensate this to enable students at lower level standards. Possibility of learning gain must be considered as plans are made for the way forward beyond the COVID-19 crisis. The conclusion of this paper is that on the above study, it is concluded that the girl child education, which is already dragging behind with many drawbacks, is now again hit back with a blow of pandemic of COVID-19. The studies identified not only the effects of the previous time, but also the negative impact of the present pandemic, COVID-19. But it is never left with vague questions and doubts and drawbacks, but with valued suggestions and deep understanding and observations of different studies. In this context, this study suggests the responsibility of government and civil society to cope up with the effects and compensate every loss in the area of girl child education. Thank you for this opportunity.